these submission rituals that you see within these, BDSM communities and stuff like that, very similar rituals sort of co-evolved in many religious communities. Whether you're talking about, ultra-Orthodox Jewish Teflon, Catholic Opus Dei, like whipping thing and stuff like that. And I don't think that any of this is because these cultures have been influenced by sexual cultures.
Yeah.
I think it's that both represent extreme forms of submission, and that extreme forms of submission, whether they be to masturbate a feeling instinct or to show supplication to a genuine great power, are going to have some degree of coevolution.
Would you like to know more?
So you guys might know this from our other content. I'll talk while you're getting ready, but that we don't use heating in our house in the winter because we believe in extreme frugality, like suffering edifies the spirit, everything like that, But last year, when she wasn't pregnant, she was wearing a Russian that she bought from like somewhere in Siberia where she could get cheap. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to share a picture with our audience because this is just too much. But what she has done, and you can talk a bit how you came to this, we're talking about pragmaxing in life. What you did is you said, okay, so first, where do people live in really cold environments? And then you got these so suits that make you look like somebody who should be called Natasha, like a James Bond villain or something. And now, because you're pregnant, you can't wear them anymore. And so she's like, okay, when did people have to deal with pregnancy and cold environments without heating? And so she went back and took inspiration from medieval outfits. And I'd love it if you could talk a bit about how your layering process works with this.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I think this is much better maternity wear. One, because actually when you go back to, before the Industrial Revolution, everyone just kind of wore the same outfit all the time. So your outfit had to grow with you. If you got fatter, if you got thinner, it would have to grow with you or shrink with you. If you got pregnant, it would have to grow or shrink with you. So I was like, oh yeah, then probably the best clothing I should wear if I'm changing sizes is clothing from a different age. And so for the winter, to stay warm, I'm basically wearing like thermal underwear, and over that I'm wearing a chemise. And then I have a, like, I guess you could say it's kind of like a corset or stays, and then a long skirt, and then a really heavy wool coat, and it just feels great. So I think it's much better maternity wear than the gross stuff that most women are forcing themselves to wear while they get larger.
And a great thing about this is you can wear it pregnancy after pregnancy and year after year and day after day, because this is a type of clothing that's designed to be worn almost every day.
Yeah, it's super durable. It's very practical, and it's extremely comfortable. So highly recommend it.
With just changing out the underlayer, obviously. But okay, so I am going to prime you with something that happened to me at this art conference we went to, which is like a conservative Davos thing that was hosted by like Jordan Peterson and Louise Perry. Anyway, in the UK, the conservatives are quite different than the conservatives in the US. They are more like small c conservatives, and the feminist side of the movement is much, much bigger there because TERFs make up a big part of the conservative movement out there. Anyway, so I was talking to them about, the IVF, artificial wombs, stuff like that. And this one woman just lost it. She goes, "What? Artificial wombs are the most evil thing ever. If we have artificial wombs, what's even the point of women? Nothing could be more anti-feminist than artificial wombs."
Hold on. Wait. A feminist woman thought that the only point of women was gestation?
Well, keep in mind, and this is actually really interesting. So these women in this conservative movement, they have a very conservative view of what a woman's role is. Have kids, care for the home, care for the kids, right?
Is that feminist?
Well, it's not. This is TERF feminism. It's a little different from what we think. It's a female-focused agenda, but and excuse me, Simone, this is a good win for women. Women really talk themselves out of a pretty good position. Today, we're like, oh, it's so anti-feminist to say women shouldn't have to work and just stay at home all day with modern appliances, caring for like 2 measly kids.
No, in a modern age, the idea of women as gestational managers and parents is actually pretty cush. I mean, in the old age, like in the ages of the clothing that I'm like mocking, women died at childbirth at really high rates. It was actually a pretty risky profession. Not anymore.
And we've repeatedly seen this from women in this aspect of the conservative movement, just horrified by artificial wombs, making women less necessary in the way that they define what womanhood is. And this moment was really interesting to me because what it demonstrated to me, like I was just trying to like think about actually what her mindset must be to be worried about this,
Yeah.
which is to say, yeah, we could, with artificial wombs, create a society in which you don't need women at all. But why is that a bad thing? Like, you, woman, you can have boys. You know that, right? Like, and these boys are part you, right? It showed to me that she identified more with her gender than with her culture or family line or even own children.
Well, but it also demonstrates a pretty significant amount of hatred towards women, because if you think that the only reason women are kept relevant in society is because they have gestational gatekeeping ability, that when that goes away, when basically men no longer have to depend on women for wombs, the assumption is that like women will completely lose their position in society, implies that she doesn't think women have any other value, that like they don't
Oh,
contribute
hold
useful
on.
ideas that
I'm gonna hit you with something that you have told me before,
uh-oh.
because you have said something that counteracted this before. You
Okay.
agreed with a friend of ours who said this, where
Okay.
she was like, with trans people sometimes being able to do femininity much better than women,
Yeah.
what's even the point of women anymore?
Yeah.
And this was the context of like, okay, if you, and this is true, like when I hear that somebody, a woman in Silicon Valley, is running a successful startup,
Yeah.
the first question I'm always going to be like, you mean a trans woman, right? Or when I hear a woman in Silicon Valley has a really high like coding position at Google, it's like, you mean a trans woman, right? And it's like 70% of the time they're like, oh yeah, trans woman. And one of the things that you had pointed out about trans women is that when they are in a privileged position of being able to pass, they can focus much more on feminine displays than even women can, because women have never seen things from the other perspective or been able to study it as critically and clinically.
Well, and also, like, when it comes to many of the things that women sort of struggle with, like weight, or like there's some builds that like basically someone starting from, I don't know, a male blank or a male starting point, you can actually have a really great look as a female when you like switch over to that. So it's really hard for a woman to compete with her, like, you know, depending on the look you're going for, like, I feel like I have gross thunder thighs and I would much prefer like men's legs, to be honest. Like, so like I think a lot of women are also like looking really
She
jealously of
really doesn't, by the way.
the
She has
lean
great legs.
the lean slender bodies of men that transition successful and are just, like insanely jealous. But yeah, I mean, I do
What
think it's hard for women to compete with some, but I mean, I think that's also just a really pessimistic view of the value that women can bring to the table. Like,
So, errant thought here that I'd never really had before: trans women often have hobby interests, and I'm not saying always, but often have hobby interests that are much more in line with men's hobby interests. So when I meet a woman in a heavily male dominated genre of hobbies, like collecting guns or Warhammer or obscure video games or other ultra nerdy pursuits, they are disproportionately trans women. If we're taking the perspective that trans women are actually women who were born into men's bodies, this seems incongruous with that perspective.
Okay,
you
so I'm
really
asking
think
you
that?
objectively.
Okay.
Objectively speaking, okay, so we're talking about the ways that women are different from men.
Yeah.
What are the things you think that on average women do better than men? And with each of these things, judge whether if you got rid of one gender, society would be worse off. Go.
Oh god. I'm not the most pro woman person out there. So my problem is like all the women friends that I like most are probably on the spectrum, and thereby are kind of less female in many ways because they don't do a lot of the social games that I can't handle. And I find interacting with like traditionally like
Mm.
hormonally normal neurotypical women it's really stressful. So I'm not the
So
best
you
at
have antagonism towards neurotypical women more broadly?
well, I think my problem is that like I want to interact with people who speak plainly, who say what they feel, and are straightforward about things. And with many neurotypical women that both you and I interact with, I feel like I cannot win because I don't speak their language, and
Yeah.
they're playing a game and I'm not, and then somehow I'm insulting them by not playing this game, and that's really stressful for me. And then I feel like we've lost some friends because of that, because I can't play their games, and that makes me really sad because we've known a lot of cool people that then I can't be friends with. So I miss all my,
But
probably
with
autistic
that
friends
being the
as well.
case, wouldn't our cultural group be better if we were all men?
So I don't
And
think.
I don't believe this myself. I'm just asking hypothetically.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I'm looking at two. When you said that, I sort of viewed two realities. One, I viewed like the free radical problem, sort of like a lot of like high testosterone, uncoupled men who are like, just high risk, high rewards. It's just like sort of, complete anarchy, violence, just a mess, right? Like I
Yeah.
don't like that. I don't really want the Bronze Age mindset reality of, raiding and everything, which I guess is actually less fun when there are no women to pillage, right? But whatever. And then I view the other world, which is just like complete gay anarchy, just like orgies, like super hot men everywhere. And then I'm like, oh, okay, like gay world, this sounds really fun. Like sign me up for that.
Yeah, I
This,
mean,
this
presumably you'd be able to control people's sexuality in this world.
Yeah, and I feel like a world full of gay men is a happier and more functional, lower drama world than a
A
world.
world full of gay men is a lower drama world?
Yeah, I mean, there's drama, but it's not toxic drama as much, if you know what I mean.
I know what you mean, I know what you mean. I just thought that was a funny statement, come on. Okay, here's another path we could go.
Yeah.
Something that it came up in the Razib episode that we shared recently, and we've talked about in a few episodes, is the concept of the Tylaxio and oxyodal tanks, right?
Uh-huh.
Which is, you wouldn't even need oxyodal tanks. You could just replace women with artificial wombs.
Define for our audience oxyidal tanks and the Telex too.
It's essentially degraded. If you're looking at the original series and not the weird things his son wrote in the Dune universe, it's what happened to the females of the Tylexu population, and not individual females. These are genetically engineered beings that are based on a female template that are meant to make artificial wombs easier to operate through connecting to like their bloodstream and their original reproductive system, but they just use them to churn out lots of people. They don't have, sentience or much consciousness. They're just sort of like blobs connected to tanks. Now, alternatively, the Tylexu men are designed to look more like, I'd say, older children. So let's say people who are like 15 or something like that, kind of like elfish and a little impish. So the idea being is that if you have this much control over the future, like, and you're choosing an iteration of male that you are freezing us at, or an iteration of female, would you freeze us at young men or would you freeze us at old men? Because you talk about this like Bronze Age pervert world. Obviously, you're not going to get a Bronze Age pervert world if you have like a bunch of sociopathic, high IQ, 15-year-old men
I mean, I don't
who have
know. I
largely been sterilized.
ah,
Like they don't feel sexuality at all.
yeah. So
Like,
what is the ideal
well, I mean, okay,
iteration of
I'll ask this
man?
question a different way. What
Okay.
if we just got rid of sexuality altogether? Like, if you do you think like an iteration of humanity would be better if you bred them to not have any sexual drives at all?
I think sexuality really doesn't, and this sounds stupid to say now that I'm saying it, but doesn't play that huge of a role. I mean, I think it's sexual dimorphism that plays a bigger role in just sort of the day to day way that men and women react differently to scenarios. That women are reacting based on very different internal models, based on different, on average, tendencies than men.
I think
And
that's true.
this is, and obviously sex drive is huge, especially for men with high levels of testosterone. Less so for women on average. It shows up in different ways, of course, more like dominant submission interest, which of course can also play into the politics that freak me out so much and make me less
Yeah.
comfortable around women, right? But I think it's those issues and not necessarily sexuality, which is something that actually came up in our book a lot. That like in the end, so much of sex is not at all about sex. It's about how you view yourself. It's about your identity. It's about how you're validating yourself. That the actual act itself is kind of
I
You know.
agree with everything you're saying was one caveat. I
Okay.
think a lot of female behavior, even the stuff that's not just like born gendered, is heavily influenced by their capacity as gatekeepers of sexual access to the extent that it's not sex itself that is causing this. It's just the way that human females are born that
They're the
causes this.
limiting factor.
Yeah, and them being gatekeepers of sexual access gives them within open sexual marketplaces, or at least attractive women or women as a group, inordinate political power. I mean, I think that that's actually the big thing that women have used to their advantage within our existing political system to
Only
take as
insofar as
much.
men have sex drives, and I think actually this is changing a lot. I
Yeah,
think,
good point.
as we're sort of entering an age of more sexless men and men who are just like, "Yeah, you know what? I'm not gonna care that much." Women are losing a lot of that power, and that dynamic is changing. So I don't know if that is as true today, and certainly tomorrow, as it may
Yeah.
have been 20, 30, 50 years
Oh,
ago.
oh yeah, a lot of women screech over this. I I also think that this is something worth pointing out from a male perspective as well. And I just want to
Mhm.
talk about like how insane it is because there are men who do this who identify more with their gender than they identify with their cultural group or children or parents or people or
Yeah.
country. Gender should be like such a low thing on the things you identify with. Now, I can understand why people identify with it, right? There, I think a core reason is we have like strong drives and strong cultural precedent when we're growing up, like in our 20s when we're determining who we are, what we think of ourselves, to find a partner. And the challenges that you face in finding a partner are going to be heavily gendered. And through that, you will communicate and engage heavily with communities that are going to be heavily gendered and primarily complaining about the opposite gender, which is
Mm.
going to cause this level of identification during many individuals' formative years. It's just, I think, important that people like approach this with some sanity. Like, yes, things may be unfair for your gender. I get that, but at the end of the day, as my favorite movie that we use in every episode here at the beginning says, we're in this for the species, boys and girls. It's simple numbers. They have more. And this is what we talk about the enemies of prenatalism is that if you want to exist in the future, you've got to find a way to make it work with the other gender. And it's hard. It's
Yeah.
hard, right? And
Yeah.
and things are unfair now. But I think approaching everyone from the opposite gender as if they're like an alien species and totally heartless is really going to create problems. Now, I am saying this as a complete hypocrite because I just sat here with a wife who already said, yeah, I think so much more like a guy than a girl that like actually girls scare me and I'm afraid to interact with them.
I mean, I don't think that much like guys either. I think like a blank, but
A
I
mentat, if we're going with Dune references here.
yeah,
Uh,
mentat thinking. Because guys think super differently too. It's just that guys think in a much more straightforward and transparent way. And there aren't as many mind games and like hidden grudges and terrifying like back channel things going on. So God, unless you're a man in Dune, by the way, unless you're what is it? Harkonnen? Yeah. Like
Harkonnen, yes.
they're like the
Um,
women of the Dune universe. I mean, they're great, but stressful. Yeah, I just don't
okay.
know. I feel like
So I'm gonna present you with a different idea here. I think if you
okay,
took sexuality out of humanity, if you took gender out of humanity, a
okay.
lot of motivation for I think many parts of humanity that people extol as the highest parts of humanity, like art and music and culture, would disappear.
Yeah, yeah.
In fact, I often mention the Futurama episode on robosexuality, which would pointed out that when men could just date robots instead of women, the motivation for it was like art, music, and then it showed men not being able to date other men. Theater disappeared. And
What is that weapon with two rocks and a string in between,
a
where the
flail,
rocks use their momentum to throw
a
each other
flail.
forward? Oh, a
There's different
flail?
types of flails, but you're generally talking about a flail. Yes.
Okay, so I think men and women act like a flail, where like there's tension between them, but flying through the air, one
Oh, you're
gives
talking about
momentum to
Ebola.
a bola. Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I thought you were talking about a flail is two balls tied to the end of a stick. A bola is two
No.
balls connected by a string that's used for
Yes.
tripping people.
That's
Yeah.
what I'm yes, that's what I'm talking about. But like
Guy
when they're
brain,
thrown
useless knowledge of weapons I'll never know. Use.
I'm glad you play as many video games as you
No,
do.
well, I don't know, like bola from video games. It's not used that frequently, but I love that guys would be like, these are things that literally every human in the world knows what they are, a bola
Yeah.
and a flail.
No
And yet,
idea.
I bet like 50% of women have no idea.
I mean,
Anyway,
I knew
continue.
what it was. I didn't know its name, but I do feel like there's this tension and interplay between men and women. But you and I have the same philosophy about cultures. We really think that variation and competition and tension are incredibly useful. That disagreement is incredibly useful. That different mindsets are incredibly useful.
Yeah.
So we would be against the idea. I mean, if anything, we would like there to be more genders than fewer genders. If anything, we should be like thrilled that there are all these additional weird genders. I think our only problem with them is we think that they're performative rather than real. If they were real and they actually did contribute genuinely different perspectives, we would be stoked.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting point. Yeah. And could that lead to more art if you had more genders and more of a relationship drives other than just sex and romance?
Yeah, like what if we lived in the Omega universe, the Omega verse?
Oh my
This
God.
this
We got
this
to talk about
women's
the
fantasy
Omegaverse.
universe where there are what alphas, betas, and omegas. There are
Yes.
like three genders, and it
And
creates
they're
all
all
this.
male, basically. So okay, I'm going to see if I can remember this. So they all present male, and alphas mate with betas. And when an alpha mates with a beta, the beta, like they latch like a dog does, where like their
Nodding,
genitals, is that what it's called?
nodding.
Nodding, yes. And they have to like stay together until they finish, and they like have these like heat periods and stuff like that. And then like omegas can like transform into an alpha when they're around a beta, or transform into a beta when they're around an alpha,
I
depending
think
on
that's it.
like what they're interested in the moment. And it transforms the ways they relate sexually and like heat cycles and stuff like that. I strongly suggest if this sounds at all interesting to you, well, we can do another episode where I prep on it beforehand and remember actually all of this universe, because I find this fascinating.
It is fascinating.
When the Gorian world, we could also include that, because that's
Right.
really interesting as well. This is a world just for people who are interested. So there's these people who went and asked, okay, well, I think women seem to have this desire to be submissive in relationships, and males seem to be more likely to have this desire to be dominant in relationships. And like a normal person would be like, okay, well, let's like try to craft like a new way to have like dominant men or something like that. They were like, no, 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 no. Let's just go back to the way we did this historically. And people would be like, oh, you mean like a traditional, like taken in hand marriage? And they're like, no, 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 no. I mean, like, I want Conan the Barbarian world.
Yeah, like a 1980s or 1970s sci-fi traditional.
Yeah, where like they dance for men in their outfits and stuff like that as like part of like mating rituals, and then do like bows and stuff. And there's all these rituals for how they interact, because they wanted this world of submission, dominance, and tons of rituals, but they didn't remember enough of our historic rituals, so they just like borrowed them from this Conan like book series.
Yeah. Like basically this sci-fi series was the basis of what then became a weird, I guess you could say somewhat BDSM, but a lot more intense subculture, which pretty much has disappeared. But you can still find some like old forum
Yeah,
archives
it was
from people
important in
talking
the
about
days
it.
of the early internet.
Yeah. And keep in mind, this is something that really like women got excited about. The
Yeah.
people who are posting a lot are the women who are in these Gorian relationships, who are enslaved to their master husbands. And I think, ultimately the guys who were agreeing to this, probably like a decent percentage of them, maybe 60%, were probably a little put upon to have to do all this, because it
Just
was
doing
like a lot of
arbitrage
work.
plays.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, yeah,
I mean,
it was a lot of work.
true.
You'd have to, ritually like beat her up and, like do the rituals and all this stuff and like know all the rules. And I think for a lot of guys, they're like, dude, I just want you to be happy and I want you to love me. Whereas like when you're doing one of these like big time ritualized, taken in hand BDSM, complicated instructions kind of relationships, I don't think that's what most guys really want. I think most guys just want a supportive wife who loves them, and then
Yeah.
this is a lot of
Well,
work,
this
and
is
it's
what
not
they're
very
having to
productive.
do to get even a simulacrum of that.
Right.
I love. It's like guys are like, oh yeah, I want a wife who's submissive and breedable. I want a submissive and breedable cat girl wife, and then they get one of these 24/7 cat cosplay women, who's like, I want a 24/7 cat relationship, and they're like, okay, well, I actually am not that cool with you walking on all fours all the time, and I
You're
have
like,
to, like,
can't we
buy
just
you
like play
food.
video games and order pizza, please?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. These types of relationships are actually an incredible amount of work to maintain.
Yeah, yeah.
Um
And I think they're mostly for the submissive person. Like in
Oh,
the
yeah.
vast majority of cases, it seems that these relationships really are for the benefit of the submissive partner because really it's all about kind of pleasing them and keeping them in line. And I feel bad for the dominant partners who are put upon.
Yeah, I was looking at a 4chan post not long ago, and some guy was like, why do we even, like, do these things for our girlfriends when a girlfriend is just a bitch that we, you know, sex our ex at times and we sleep with. Yeah, we F. And a lot of young guys, I think they enter communities and they think that by saying things like this, they are signaling that they are like high status males. And it's like, we know that almost no guy actually wants a girl like that. Like us guys, I'm sorry, we know that you're probably 14 or 16, between that age range, if you're making claims like that, because very few guys actually want that. Most guys just want somebody to care for them, and when they do want weird sexual stuff, they want it in an incredibly isolated scenario. They don't want it to be part of their daily existence. And it doesn't make you look cool to say that. Like, what I think when somebody says that is like, oh, so you're like a Gorian or something. Like, you plan to have like a 24/7, like, taken in hand relationship where you're having to put up with all of these crazy rituals for this woman that you found because you convinced yourself that that's what you needed to do to be a dominant male.
So stressful. But
Yeah.
I don't think the vast majority of those men in those relationships, any sort of like really heavy dominance relationship of this sort, of like the weird nerdy sorts,
Yeah.
wanted to do it to be tough. I think they did it because a hot woman or a woman that was like of sufficiently competitive value to them really wanted it.
They're
And
all the weird nerdy through it.
yeah, they were
They're all the
willing
weird
to
nerdy
step
stuff.
up.
I'm sorry, I look at Andrew Tate playing with his sword. He's a nerd. He's a hyper nerd.
Yeah, he's a nerd, but I think he just loves being dominant, and I think he is one of those few people
Yeah.
who is maintaining frame in a relationship because that is what he lives by. It is like truly his identity. He wakes up in frame, he goes to sleep in frame, like he is frame again. Like he is a
Well,
rare
yeah, I
exception
think he
though.
believes the quality of his life is the effectiveness with which he's maintaining frame within relationships. Like, that is what makes him a valuable person. Which is
No, I think like hormonally he couldn't do it any other way. I don't think this
No, I
is.
disagree with that strongly.
Oh, no.
I
I
think I
definitely.
think I think self-perception wise, he couldn't do it another way. He has built up this self-perception. I think if I look at the way that he structured relationships and stuff like that, he actually shows a lot of creativity. Like, he has like an interesting poly relationship where like his brother and him share a group of girls that live in like a house together. Like, that is incredibly creative.
Do they
That
share
is,
the women or do they just have women at a shared compound though?
my understanding is they share the same women.
Oh, wow. But they're
Um
brothers. Yeah, so that's kind of traditional and kind of not, huh?
Yeah, no, and as you've said tater tots before, I just gotta
The
remember
tater
that. The
tots
house that's
running
filled with
around.
little tater tots, little
Yeah.
tater baby,
Oh, cute
uh,
little pattering
baby face.
feet.
Yeah, no, I think it is hard to engage any of these, and this is why I think they are all nerds, right? When you engage with a differential sexual subculture that's not just going along one of the traditional religious pathways,
Mm.
you are going to differentiate from mainstream society. And through differentiating from mainstream society, you will justly earn the title of nerd or weirdo or something like that. A really interesting thing that we can bring up in this video, we bring it up in our book. It's probably one of our most, I think, spiciest points, but people don't really dig into this that much, is that these submission rituals that you see within these, BDSM communities and stuff like that, very similar rituals sort of co-evolved in many religious communities.
Mm.
Whether you're talking about, ultra Orthodox Jewish Teflon, which to just looks like, anyway, but it's where they wrap tightly leather around their arms and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
if you're not familiar with it as an outsider, you're like, "Whoa, is this a sex thing? This looks like a sex thing."
Yeah, another one would be like the Catholic Opus Dei, like whipping thing and stuff like that. And I don't think that any of this is because these cultures have been influenced by sexual cultures.
Yeah.
I think it's that both represent extreme forms of submission, and that extreme forms of submission, whether they be to masturbate a feeling instinct or to show supplication to a genuine great power, are going to have some degree of coevolution. But it just looks very odd as somebody who likes studying both communities and is separated from both communities to an extent.
Yeah. So, do we need women? Not for gestation, not for making us happy, but for providing tension.
Well,
Yes.
okay, I'll word to provide tension. I think to provide motivation to men. I think as a guy, I would have a much harder time motivating myself if I wasn't
But why do
doing it.
men like women?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. Like, why do I find it easier? Here's why. More immediate feedback. So I can work every day to try to make the world a better place or something like that, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But I don't see immediate rewards for that. In fact, most of the world, just hates me for it, right? Because anybody who's trying to change things is almost axiomatically undermining the existing power structure in the world, which is not in the best interest of those who are at the top rungs of that power structure. So they are going to attack me as evil. And that is
Okay.
what I get every day. And so I have to come home and I see your pride in me standing up for my moral values. And I see you telling me, how much you appreciate how much work I'm putting into things and everything like that. And that appreciation is, I think, something that, like, at a biological level, I am cued into. And this is, I think, why I say when guys are looking for a girl, the number one thing you're looking for is actually gratitude.
Admiration, appreciation.
Gratitude, the ability to have genuine gratitude for the things you do for them,
But
because
do you
not all
not
women
think
have
that
that
like
anymore.
Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan and their like circle of friends are not supportive of each other? I mean, they may express it using different mannerisms, but I think that
If
they're extremely supportive of each other.
I know, and I mean this in a completely non-derogatory way. I want to highlight this. But like, if I did something for my brother's approval, it would feel real gay to me. And I don't mean this in like a gay is bad sense. I just mean something about doing something to make somebody else like proud of me. If that person is a guy, I don't know, it feels sexual in a way.
But not with a woman, which is the gender to which you personally are attracted. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, so what I guess I'm saying and what I guess I'm realizing here is something about the desire to make you proud of the person I'm being day to day is sexual in nature,
Oh,
or is coded sexually in my brain,
uh-huh.
because when I think about doing that for a guy,
You're
it's
like,
like that feels a little gay. In the same way, it reminds me of Pulp Fiction when he's like, would you give one of your male friends a foot rub? Because the guy said the foot rub's not sexual at all. And he's like, no, I wouldn't. And he's like, well, then it is sexual, isn't it?
hmm.
Anyway, I love you to death, Simone, and thank you for the role you play in immediate feedback and appreciating who I'm being in the world. And this is also why we say the most important thing when you marry someone. So I talk about the skill, the trait, gratitude. But when you're marrying somebody, what you're actually asking is not who is that person, but is who does that person want me to become, and are they able to help me become that person? Because if Simone wanted me to become somebody who I didn't want to become, that would be terrible, right? Like, I'm just married to her. I have to live as me, and yet she transforms me so much. And I love some guys will be like, "Oh, that's such a beta thing to say, that your wife influences you and that you care what she thinks of you." And it's like, you don't look tough saying that. Like, I understand in your little community, you might think that that's a status symbol, but in the real world, that doesn't look like a status symbol. It makes it look like you don't have anyone who cares about you,
Yeah,
which is not
understood.
the flex you might think it is.
Love it.
Anyway,
Love
love
it.
you, Simone, and have a wonderful day.
You too, husband.